Ford just made a move so bold it has Donald Trump seeing red, and it could change everything you think you know about American industry. This wasn't a quiet corporate decision, it was a direct challenge to Trump's America First policies. Why did Ford take this risk? How did Trump respond? And most importantly, what does this mean for American jobs? And for you? Stay tuned, because this story is just getting started. What's happening? Ford just delivered a message so bold it's shaking the foundations of American politics. It wasn't a subtle announcement, nor was it wrapped in corporate jargon. It was a direct statement of intent that sent shockwaves across the nation. Ford, an emblem of American manufacturing and ingenuity for over a century, declared its plan to shift a significant portion of its electric vehicle production overseas. For many, this wasn't just a business decision, it was a bombshell. Ford, a company deeply embedded in the fabric of American industry, was no longer playing by the rules set by former President Donald Trump. The decision felt like a defiance of the America First ethos that Trump had championed during his presidency. But Ford wasn't just walking away, it was sending a clear message. Survival in the modern automotive market demanded global competitiveness, even at the cost of tradition. The boldness of this move can't be understated. For decades, Ford stood as a symbol of American resilience, weathering economic storms and staying true to its roots. This announcement marked a turning point, a moment where legacy met reality. Yet Ford didn't present this shift as a surrender to globalization. Instead, it framed the decision as a leap forward, emphasizing sustainability and innovation. This is more than an announcement, it's a turning point that's redefining the rules of the game. But Ford's announcement didn't just stop there. It lit a firestorm of outrage from Donald Trump. Trump's outrage. Trump's reaction? Explosive doesn't even begin to cover it. The former president, known for his unfiltered and combative style, was quick to respond. At a rally just days after Ford's announcement, Trump thundered, "We built Ford. The American worker built Ford. And now they've turned their backs on us." The crowd roared in agreement, waving signs that read, "Bring jobs back" and "Buy American." This wasn't just a political soundbite, it was a declaration of war. Trump framed Ford's decision as a betrayal, not just of his policies, but of the American people. He accused the company of abandoning its workers and values in pursuit of cheaper labor and materials overseas. "This is what happens when corporations prioritize profits over patriotism," he proclaimed, his words cutting deep into the emotions of his supporters. But Trump's outrage wasn't limited to speeches. He took to his social media channels, rallying his followers and calling for a boycott of Ford vehicles. "Do not support a company that turns its back on America," he posted, his words quickly spreading across the internet. The message was clear. Ford had crossed a line, and Trump was determined to make them pay for it. But Trump's outrage wasn't the only thing Ford was prepared for. They had a bold response ready. To understand why Ford made such a bold move, we need to dig deeper into the challenges they were facing. Why Ford made this move? What pushed Ford to take such a risky stand against Trump's policies? To understand, we need to talk about the unique pressures facing the automotive industry, and Ford in particular. The cornerstone of Trump's economic platform was protectionism, tariffs on imported goods, incentives for domestic production, and a rallying cry for companies to buy American, hire American. While these policies resonated with many, they created significant challenges for industries reliant on global supply chains. For Ford, the tipping point came with Trump's tariffs on essential materials like lithium and cobalt, key components in electric vehicle batteries. The costs of domestic production began to soar. Lithium, often referred to as white gold for its value in EV manufacturing, was largely sourced and processed overseas. Tariffs on these materials drove prices up by double digits, squeezing profit margins and making it increasingly difficult for Ford to compete with companies like Tesla, which had streamlined their production processes. Supply chain disruptions only added to the chaos, creating delays and shortages that hampered Ford's ability to meet demand. Ford's leadership faced a tough choice: cling to traditional practices or adapt to a rapidly changing global market. Expanding electric vehicle production overseas wasn't just about cutting costs, it was about survival. The global demand for electric vehicles was skyrocketing, and Ford knew it needed to act decisively to secure its place in the race for EV dominance. But this wasn't just an economic decision, it was also a strategic pivot. Ford framed the move as part of its commitment to sustainability and progress. By focusing on global EV production, the company aimed to position itself as a leader in the green revolution, tapping into markets like Europe and Asia, where demand for electric vehicles was particularly strong. Ford's decision wasn't just about economics, it was a message, loud and clear. But while Ford had its reasons, the immediate fallout made it clear this was no ordinary decision. The initial fallout. The bombshell had just dropped, but the ripple effects were immediate. Across the country, Americans were divided. Supporters of Trump's America First policies were furious, accusing Ford of selling out to globalization. Factory workers in Ford-heavy towns, from Michigan to Kentucky, worried about what the decision meant for their jobs and communities. On the other side of the spectrum, environmental advocates and progressive politicians praised Ford's boldness. They argued that the company was making the tough but necessary decisions to lead the automotive industry into a sustainable future. For them, Ford's focus on EV production wasn't a betrayal, it was a beacon of hope in the fight against climate change. The media frenzy only added fuel to the fire. Conservative outlets aligned with Trump, painting Ford as a symbol of corporate greed and disloyalty. Progressive channels, meanwhile, celebrated the move as a sign of progress. The narrative wasn't just about Ford, it was about what the company represented in a deeply divided America. For Ford, the stakes couldn't have been higher. The company's leadership knew they were walking a tightrope, balancing their commitment to innovation with the weight of their legacy. Internally, employees and executives debated the long-term impact of the decision. Would Ford's pivot to global EV production strengthen its position in the market, or would it erode the trust and loyalty it had spent decades building? This was just the beginning. Ford's announcement had set the stage for a high-stakes showdown. As the dust began to settle, both sides prepared for a clash that would shape the narrative even further. Trump's declaration of war. Trump didn't just criticize Ford, he declared war. At a fiery rally packed with supporters, Trump turned Ford's announcement into a rallying cry. We built Ford. The American worker built Ford. And this is how they repay us? By shipping your jobs overseas, by turning their back on everything this country stands for. His voice thundered across the crowd, eliciting cheers and chants of USA. This was no ordinary criticism. Trump's words were designed to sting, and they did. He framed Ford's decision as a betrayal of the American worker and the country's industrial legacy. We gave Ford everything: tax cuts, incentives, and a loyal workforce, he declared, and they stabbed us in the back. The stakes for Trump were personal. During his presidency, Ford had been a symbolic partner in his economic vision, often touted as an example of American manufacturing excellence. Now, Ford's move to expand electric vehicle production overseas felt like a direct challenge to his America First ideology. Trump's supporters were quick to echo his outrage, flooding social media with calls to boycott Ford products and accusing the company of abandoning American values. Trump's fiery rhetoric wasn't just for show, it was strategic. He used Ford's decision to reignite his base and reinforce his vision of economic nationalism. This isn't just about Ford, he proclaimed. This is about every company that thinks it can put profits over patriotism. We won't stand for it. Trump's words fueled a national firestorm, but Ford wasn't backing down. While Trump was rallying his base, Ford had its own response ready. Ford's defiant response. Ford fired back, not with anger, but with calculated strategy. In a carefully crafted press release, the company doubled down on its decision, emphasizing that it wasn't abandoning the US, but adapting to the realities of a globalized market. We remain deeply committed to American jobs and innovation. The statement read, highlighting Ford's recent investments in US-based electric vehicle plants in states like Michigan and Kentucky. Ford's leadership knew they couldn't afford to be seen as a company turning its back on its home country. To counter Trump's accusations, they pointed to billions of dollars already invested in domestic EV production and infrastructure. These efforts, they argued, were proof of their dedication to the American workforce. But Ford didn't stop there. The company framed its move as a bold step toward global sustainability. By ramping up EV production overseas, Ford positioned itself as a leader in the green revolution, aiming to meet growing international demand while reducing its environmental footprint. This isn't just about staying competitive, it's about leading the way toward a sustainable future. Ford CEO James Farley stated in an interview, the message was clear. Ford wasn't retreating, it was evolving. Still, the tension between their global ambitions and their American roots was undeniable. Could Ford convince the public that its decision was in the best interest of everyone? Ford wasn't just responding, they were reshaping the narrative. The conflict didn't just stay in press releases, it exploded across the media. The media frenzy. The clash between Ford and Trump became a spectacle no one could ignore. Within hours of Ford's announcement and Trump's fiery response, the story dominated headlines. News networks dissected every detail, while social media platforms became battlegrounds for heated debates. Partisan news outlets took predictable sides. Conservative channels echoed Trump's accusations, painting Ford as a traitor to American workers. They ran segments featuring factory employees who felt abandoned, amplifying the narrative that Ford had sold out for profits. On the other side, progressive media praised Ford's commitment to sustainability, arguing that the company was making tough but necessary decisions to stay competitive in a rapidly changing market. The media frenzy didn't just amplify the conflict, it shaped the way people understood it. For some, Ford's decision was a necessary adaptation to global challenges. For others, it was a betrayal of everything they believed the company stood for. The narrative was no longer just about Ford and Trump, it was about the soul of American industry. The battle wasn't just in the headlines, it was playing out in living rooms and online forums across the nation. But beyond the media firestorm, this battle revealed something much deeper about America. The political divide. This wasn't just about Ford and Trump, it exposed a deep divide in America. On one side were those who saw Ford's move as a necessary step toward progress. On the other were those who viewed it as yet another example of corporate greed and globalization eroding American values. Politicians quickly seized the opportunity to take sides. Trump's allies in Congress called for punitive measures against companies outsourcing jobs, proposing new tariffs and tax penalties aimed directly at Ford. If Ford wants to operate overseas, fine, one senator declared, but they shouldn't expect the American taxpayer to foot the bill. Meanwhile, progressive lawmakers defended Ford, highlighting the importance of sustainability and global competitiveness. This isn't about betrayal, it's about survival. One representative argued, Ford is doing what it must to stay ahead in a fiercely competitive industry. The divide wasn't just political, it was cultural. In small towns where Ford factories had long been economic anchors, people grappled with conflicting emotions. Some felt betrayed, worried that the company's global ambitions would come at the expense of local jobs. Others saw hope in Ford's focus on electric vehicles, believing it could create new opportunities in the long run. For Ford, navigating this divide was no easy task. The company had to balance its commitment to innovation with the weight of its legacy. Could it convince the public that its decision was a step forward, not a step away? The lines were drawn and both sides were preparing for the next battle. And as the nation divided, the real-world consequences began to hit home. Jobs on the line. Ford's announcement sent shockwaves through communities reliant on its manufacturing plants. For many factory workers, the question wasn't about politics or global competitiveness. It was about survival. What happens to us? Was the question on everyone's lips. In towns like Dearborn, Michigan, and Louisville, Kentucky, where Ford's presence had been an economic lifeline for decades, rumors of layoffs sparked panic. Local workers, many of whom had spent their entire careers with Ford, feared that shifting production overseas meant fewer jobs and less security. They're telling us to trust them, one assembly line worker said, but every time a company goes global, we're the ones left behind. Workers began organizing town halls, demanding answers from both Ford and local politicians. Small businesses that thrived off Ford's operations also felt the squeeze. Cafes, hardware stores, and other service providers that catered to Ford employees saw a drop in activity almost immediately. The uncertainty surrounding Ford's future created a ripple effect, leaving these communities grappling with more questions than answers. While Ford's leadership emphasized its continued investment in domestic production, the reality for many workers felt different. Promises of electric vehicle jobs in the future couldn't offset the immediate fear of job losses today. The stakes for these communities couldn't have been higher. The stakes for American workers couldn't be higher, but the fallout didn't stop there. The effects of Ford's move were being felt far beyond the factories. The economic ripple effect. Ford's decision didn't just affect its employees, it rippled through the entire American manufacturing sector. Trump's tariffs, which were designed to protect domestic jobs, were now being scrutinized for their unintended consequences. By driving up the cost of materials essential for electric vehicle production, these tariffs had made it nearly impossible for companies like Ford to stay competitive without looking abroad. Economists pointed to a growing trend. Globalization was no longer a choice, but a necessity for companies operating in industries heavily reliant on international supply chains. For Ford, the challenge wasn't just about building cars. It was about navigating a global market where materials like lithium and cobalt, vital for EV batteries, were primarily sourced overseas. Compounding the issue were ongoing supply chain disruptions. The pandemic had exposed vulnerabilities in the global trade network, leading to delays and price increases for everything from semiconductors to steel. Ford's leadership argued that expanding overseas was a way to mitigate these risks, but critics saw it as an abandonment of American workers. The automotive industry as a whole began to feel the strain. Rival companies like General Motors and Stellantis found themselves facing similar pressures, with rising material costs and political uncertainty making it harder to balance domestic production with global competitiveness. The fight between tradition and progress had never been more visible, and this fight was forcing Ford to confront its own identity. Ford's identity crisis. For over a century, Ford had been synonymous with American industry. It wasn't just a car company, it was a cultural institution, a symbol of innovation, resilience, and the American dream. But now, that identity was under threat. Ford's decision to expand EV production overseas raised a fundamental question. Could the company remain an American icon while embracing globalization? Critics argued that Ford was turning its back on the very values that had made it successful, abandoning its workers and heritage for short-term gains. Supporters countered that Ford was doing what it needed to survive in a fiercely competitive market. Internally, the tension was palpable. Ford executives grappled with the challenge of balancing their global ambitions with their responsibility to the American workforce. The company's CEO, James Farley, spoke candidly about the dilemma. "We're committed to innovation and progress, but we also recognize the importance of our roots. This isn't an either-or decision, it's about finding a balance." But finding that balance was easier said than done. The company's efforts to frame its decision as a step towards sustainability and global leadership were met with skepticism by those who felt left behind. For Ford, the stakes weren't just economic, they were existential. Could the company adapt to a changing world without losing its soul? Ford's survival depends on finding a balance between innovation and tradition. Meanwhile, Trump was turning this clash into a centerpiece of his political agenda. Trump's political playbook. For Donald Trump, Ford's announcement was a golden opportunity to rally his base and reinforce his economic nationalism agenda. At rallies and in interviews, he framed the conflict as a battle between patriotic American workers and a corporate elite more interested in profits than people. Ford's decision is a betrayal, he declared, not just of the American worker, but of the American dream. Trump's message resonated with his supporters, many of whom saw Ford's move as emblematic of a larger trend in corporate America. His rhetoric was fiery and relentless, accusing Ford of selling out and calling for punitive measures to prevent other companies from following suit. Proposals for new tariffs, tax penalties, and regulatory scrutiny were floated as potential responses. But Trump's playbook wasn't just about policy, it was about perception. He used the conflict to energize his base, positioning himself as the champion of the American worker against a backdrop of globalization and corporate greed. At one rally, he proclaimed, "This isn't just about Ford, it's about standing up to every company that forgets where they come from." The political divide deepened. Trump's allies in Congress rallied to his side, pushing for legislation to penalize companies outsourcing jobs. Meanwhile, progressive lawmakers defended Ford, arguing that the company was making tough but necessary decisions to adapt to a rapidly changing market. The Ford-Trump feud was becoming a defining moment in American politics, but the implications of this clash went far beyond politics. It was shaping the future of the industry itself. The future of EVs. Electric vehicles aren't just the future, they're the present, reshaping the auto industry faster than anyone could have imagined. Yet Ford's decision to shift a significant portion of EV production overseas highlighted a critical question: is America ready to lead the charge? The demand for electric vehicles is surging globally, driven by advancements in battery technology, government incentives, and growing consumer interest in sustainability. For Ford, capitalizing on this demand is essential. The company has committed to producing a majority of its fleet as electric vehicles within the next decade. It's an ambitious goal, but one that requires navigating complex supply chains and global competition. Critical minerals like lithium and cobalt, essential for EV batteries, are sourced and processed predominantly overseas. Trump's tariffs on these materials further complicated the equation, driving up costs for domestic production. To stay competitive, Ford saw no alternative but to expand abroad. Yet this shift isn't just about economics, it's about positioning. By focusing on global markets, Ford aims to solidify its place as a leader in sustainability. However, this bold strategy leaves many wondering, can Ford maintain its American roots while embracing a global vision? Ford's decision could redefine its role in the green revolution or leave it behind, and as Ford looked to the future, the political fallout continued to evolve. The political aftermath. The Ford-Trump clash didn't just stay in the headlines, it reshaped political discourse. Trump used the controversy to bolster his narrative of economic nationalism, framing Ford as a symbol of corporate betrayal. "They're taking your jobs and giving them to foreign workers," he declared at one rally, his words sparking heated debates across the nation. Meanwhile, progressive politicians defended Ford, pointing to the need for global competitiveness in the race for EV dominance. "This isn't about betrayal," one lawmaker argued, "it's about adapting to a changing world." The divide extended beyond politics, spilling into communities and households. For some, Ford's move was a necessary step toward progress and sustainability. For others, it was a betrayal of everything the company represented. As the political battle lines deepened, one thing became clear. This wasn't just about Ford or Trump, it was about the future of American industry and the values that would define it. This wasn't just a battle, it was a statement about America's future. The lessons from this conflict go beyond politics. They're reshaping the very fabric of American industry. Lessons for American industry. Ford's gamble raises a profound question. Can progress and patriotism coexist? The clash with Trump highlighted the tension between embracing global markets and preserving local jobs. It's a challenge faced not just by Ford, but by countless American companies navigating a rapidly changing world. The automotive industry is at a crossroads. Sustainability is no longer optional, it's a necessity. Companies like Ford are under pressure to reduce emissions, invest in green technology, and meet the rising demand for electric vehicles. Yet, achieving these goals while maintaining domestic production is an uphill battle. The lessons from Ford's decision are clear. Survival in the 21st century requires bold innovation, strategic adaptation, and a willingness to take risks. But these choices come with trade-offs, and the challenge is finding a balance that benefits both the company and its stakeholders. Ford's choices could serve as a blueprint or a cautionary tale for the industry, and as the industry adapts, the rules of the game are changing forever. The new normal. In the aftermath of the Ford-Trump conflict, one thing is clear: the rules have changed. Globalization, sustainability, and technological innovation are reshaping American industry, forcing companies to adapt or risk obsolescence. Ford's decision to expand EV production overseas wasn't just a business move, it was a reflection of a larger transformation happening across industries. The tension between tradition and progress, between the desire to preserve the past and the need to embrace the future, is shaping the narrative of what it means to be an American company in a globalized world. For Ford, the stakes remain high. The company must prove that its global strategy can coexist with its commitment to American workers and values. Success will depend on its ability to deliver on its promises, rebuild trust, and lead the charge toward a greener future. The Ford-Trump saga is more than just a corporate dispute. It's a microcosm of the challenges facing the modern world. The decisions made today will echo for decades, shaping the future of American manufacturing, politics, and society. The future of American industry is being written right now, and it's a story we're all part of. The Ford-Trump clash is a story of ambition, identity, and the high-stakes decisions that define our future. What do you think about Ford's bold move and Trump's fiery response? Are we witnessing the beginning of a new era for American industry or a cautionary tale of global ambition? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Do you side with Ford's vision for progress or Trump's call to protect American jobs? We want to hear from you, and while you're here, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel.